Ever wondered where the very idea of modern economics truly began?
It's a great question.
Things like productivity, trade, uh, even how we think about money. Well, they largely trace back to one massive work.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into excerpts from a foundational text, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations.
It really is the bedrock of so much modern economic thinking.
Our mission today is to unpack its core ideas for you, find those, surprising insights, and see why these 18th century thoughts are still so relevant.
It's actually amazing how much Smith laid out. We'll look at how he observed everything, from tiny pin factories to huge colonial trade networks.
And pieced it all together.
Exactly. Synthesized it into this comprehensive view of how wealth is created and how nations prosper. This dive should give you a real shortcut to understanding those foundations.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Smith kicks things off right away with the division of labor. What did he mean by that exactly? Why was it so important?
Well, it's fundamental to his whole argument. He saw it as the primary engine of improved productivity.
And he used that famous pin factory example, didn't he?
He did. It's iconic for a reason.
Right.
He describes how one single workman, doing everything himself might struggle to make even 20 pins, maybe not even one, in a day.
Right.
But if you divide the work into maybe 18 distinct steps, one person draws the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, a fifth grinds the top.
All these tiny, specific tasks.
Precisely. Even making the head involved 2 or 3 separate operations, then putting it on, whitening the pins. With this specialization, maybe 10 people could make upwards of 48,000 pins a day.
Wow, that's an incredible jump in productivity.
It's explosive. And the key insight Smith had was why this happens. He pointed to 3 things. Increased dexterity in each worker, saving time lost switching between tasks, and importantly, the invention of machines that facilitate these specialized jobs.
So it's not just working harder, it's working smarter, more focused.
Exactly. And the result, as Smith saw it, was this universal opulence, which extends itself to the lowest ranks of the people.
Universal opulence.
Yeah.
What did he mean by that? Everyone gets rich.
Not quite rich in our modern sense, perhaps, but vastly better off. He meant that because every worker produces so much more of their specific thing, they have a large surplus to trade.
Ah, so they can exchange their pins or whatever they make.
For a huge quantity of goods made by others, this creates abundance that spreads through society. And underlying it all, he saw this innate human disposition to truck, barter, and exchange.
Our tendency to trade things.
Yeah, he thought it was fundamental, the engine of it all.
Okay, so division of labor seems fantastic.
Mm.
But Smith, being Smith, saw a limitation, didn't he? This is where it gets really interesting for market dynamics.
He did. He pointed out quite crucially that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market.
Meaning?
Well, think about it. You can only have highly specialized jobs if there are enough customers demanding that specific product or service.
Right, like his example of the nailer.
Exactly. A dedicated nail maker can thrive in a city where lots of people need nails. But Smith says in the remote highlands of Scotland, where the market is tiny, you couldn't possibly support a full-time nailer.
So the village carpenter has to do everything.
Yes. He might be a joiner, cabinet maker, carver, wheelwright, plowright, all rolled into one. The market just isn't big enough for those separate trades.
So market size is the constraint. You need buyers.
Precisely. And this is why he highlighted things like transport. He noted how access to water carriage, great rivers like the Nile or Ganges, or coastal shipping dramatically expanded markets.
Because it made trade easier and cheaper over longer distances.
Right, which allowed for much greater specialization and consequently what he called great opulence. Without big accessible markets, the power of dividing labor is, well, limited.
Okay, that makes sense. So from productivity and markets, how does this connect to understanding price and value itself? Smith makes this key distinction, doesn't he, between real and nominal price?
Yes, this is absolutely central. He argues that the real price of something isn't its money cost, which can fluctuate wildly.
So what is it then?
It's the labor, the amount of human effort required to produce it. He famously stated, labor is the real measure of the exchangeable value of all commodities.
The real measure.
Meaning, the true value of anything you possess is equal to the quantity of other people's labor it allows you to purchase or command. That's the fundamental metric for him.
That's a different way of thinking about wealth. Not just gold, but command over effort.
Exactly. Now, money comes in as the practical nominal measure. He talks about its origins.
Right, how coins initially represented a weight of metal. like the Roman as being a pound of copper.
Yes, initially received by weight. But eventually, for convenience, people started accepting coins by tale, just counting them, assuming the weight and purity were correct.
Which leads to another fascinating point he made.
Ah, yes, the temptation for rulers. Smith dryly observes that princes and states often found it in their temporary interest to diminish the quantity of pure metal contained in their coins.
Debasing the currency, basically. Clipping coins, adding cheaper metals.
Right, but he notes they seldom fancy it to be their interest to augment it. So the long-term trend was almost always towards reducing the real value of the money unit,
And then you had huge external events like the discovery of the Americas.
which flooded Europe with silver and gold, massively increasing the supply and therefore diminished the value of gold and silver themselves relative to other goods, especially labor. Another blow to using money as a stable long-term measure.
So if money is this shifting yardstick, how did Smith suggest measuring value across long periods? You mentioned corn earlier.
Right. He argued that the real value of a corn rent, paying rent in a fixed amount of grain, varies much less from century to century than that of a money rent.
Because corn is a basic necessity. Its relationship to labor is more stable.
More stable than money, yes. He did acknowledge that the money price of labor itself tends to adjust to the average or ordinary price of corn over time, smoothing out temporary spikes or drops in grain prices.
Okay. Now, Smith breaks down the price of any commodity into its component parts. What are those?
There are three key components. First, the wages of labor. Second, the profits of stock, that's the return the undertaker of the work, the entrepreneur, needs to make it worthwhile, covering risk and investment.
And the third?
The rent of land. And crucially, he emphasizes that all three of these wages, profit, rent, are ultimately measured by the quantity of labor they enable you to purchase or command. Labor remains the bedrock.
Got it. And this ties into his idea of natural versus market price, how supply and demand work.
Exactly. The natural price is basically the cost of production enough to cover those normal wages, profits, and rent. The market price is what it actually sells for in any given day.
Which can be higher or lower.
Right. If supply falls short of demand, the market price rises above the natural price. If there's a glut, it falls below. But, Smith argued, where there's perfect liberty, meaning free competition, the market price will always tend to gravitate back towards that natural price.
Like an equilibrium.
Precisely. The self-regulating market, driven by self-interest and competition.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into those components, starting with wages. What determines the wages of labor beyond just, basic subsistence? Smith had some really specific factors, didn't he?
He did 5 main ones that explain variations in pay between different jobs, even when requiring similar skill levels. It's quite insightful.
What's the first one?
First is the agreeableness of the job itself. Is it easy or hard, clean or dirty, honorable or dishonorable? He gives the example of a tailor earning less than a weaver, partly because tailoring was seen as easier.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Second, the cost of learning the trade. Acquiring skills can be expensive and time-consuming, like investing in an expensive machine, as he put it. That cost needs to be recouped through higher wages.
Right, like doctors or lawyers today needing years of education. Third,
the constancy of employment. A job that's seasonal or insecure, like a bricklayer who can't work in winter, needs to pay more when work is available to cover the downtime.
Okay. Fourth,
the level of trust required. Jobs handling valuable goods or money, like goldsmiths or bankers, command higher wages because of the trust and responsibility involved.
and the fifth factor?
Fifth is the probability of success. In professions where many try but few succeed, like law back then, the successful few need to earn enough to compensate for the many who fail. It's like a lottery.
Fascinating how he broke that down. He also talked about how wages change with economic conditions, right? Like in times of plenty.
Yes, he observed that during years of sudden and extraordinary plenty, the demand for labor rises. Masters have more capital, they want to expand, so they bid against each other for workers, raising both the real and money price of labor.
And the opposite in hard times.
Conversely, scarcity reduces the demand for labor, pushing wages down.
And he directly addressed the social impact of rising wages for the working class, didn't he? Posing that question.
He did. Is this improvement in the circumstances of the lower ranks of the people to be regarded as an advantage or as an inconveniency to the society?
And his answer was pretty clear.
Unequivocal. He said, what improves the circumstances of the greater part can never be regarded as any inconveniency to the whole. He firmly believed a better life for the majority benefits everyone, a very progressive stance for the time.
Definitely. Okay, so moving from wages to the next component, profits of stock.
Yeah.
He gives some historical context on interest rates, too.
Right. He notes interest rates fluctuated maybe 5% in Queen Anne's time, down to 3% before the war he was writing about. Interest rates for him were a good indicator of the general level of profit. Lower interest suggested lower, but perhaps more secure profits.
And he highlights a really interesting situation in new colonies, like North America then.
Ah, yes, the colonies. This raises an important point. He observed something unusual there. Both wages and profits were higher than in England.
How could that be? Usually high wages mean lower profits, right?
Normally, yes. But he explained it by the sheer abundance of land relative to capital. There was more land than they have stock to cultivate. This meant huge potential returns on investment, leading to very large profits.
And those high profits fueled rapid capital accumulation.
Exactly, which in turn created a strong demand for labor, driving wages up too. He specifically said this combination of high wages and high profits scarce ever go together, except in the peculiar circumstances of new colonies.
Impacting the final price of goods compared to wages.
He argued that high profits tend much more to raise the price of work than high wages. His reasoning was interesting.
Oh, so.
Well, imagine wages go up by, say, 2 pence a day. The price of the final product, like a piece of linen, might go up by that amount multiplied by the number of workers or days involved. But profit is calculated as a percentage of the total capital advanced.
Ah, so even a small percentage increase in profit applied to the whole investment could have a bigger impact on the final price than a wage hike.
That was his argument. It compounds differently. He also noted the power of reinvested profits, stating, a great stock, though with small profits, generally increases faster than a small stock with great profits.
The old money makes money idea.
Pretty much. Compounding returns on a large capital base, even at a lower rate.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the assets themselves, capital and land. How did Smith categorize capital?
He divided it into 2 main types: fixed capital and circulating capital.
Fixed capital being?
Things that yield revenue or profit without changing hands. So machines, buildings, improvements to land, even useful abilities acquired through education skills are a form of fixed capital.
And circulating capital.
That's the capital used to buy goods and sell them for a profit, or materials that get transformed. It includes money itself, used for transactions, provisions for workers, raw materials, and finished goods waiting to be sold. These things constantly circulate, change masters.
He gives the example of a merchant's capital being entirely circulating.
Right, because their whole business is buying and selling. A manufacturer, though, would have both. Circulating capital, materials, wages, finished goods, and fixed capital, factory machinery.
Now here's a really striking idea. His view on money, the actual gold and silver coin.
Yes, this is fascinating. He considered ready money, the coins physically circulating in an economy, to be all dead stock.
Dead stock. Why dead?
Because, in his view, it produces nothing to the country. It facilitates exchange, yes, but it doesn't directly create goods or services. It's like a tool, but not the product itself. The real productive capital is the machinery, the materials, the food for workers.
So how can a country make this dead stock more productive if it's just sitting there as coins?
Through banking. Specifically through the judicious operations of banking that substitute paper money for gold and silver.
How does that help?
By issuing trustworthy paper money, banks allow a large portion of the gold and silver previously needed for circulation to be freed up. This dead gold and silver can then be sent abroad to purchase active capital materials, tools, goods, turning it into active and productive stock.
So banks transform dead assets into working assets.
That's the idea. He used examples from Scotland and the American colonies, noting their enterprising and projecting spirit meant they wanted to employ all available stock productively. This sometimes even led to an overissuance of paper money relative to the gold reserves, but the underlying principle was sound.
He also laid out 4 ways capital could be employed in an economy.
Yes, 4 main channels. First, procuring raw produce farming, mining, fishing. Second, manufacturing that raw produce. Third, transporting either raw or manufactured goods wholesale trade. And fourth, dividing those goods into smaller portions for consumers' retail trade.
It seems comprehensive. And turning to land, the other great asset, he talked about rent.
Right. The natural rent of land he saw partly as the return on the landlord's investment in improvements, drainage, enclosures, buildings. But he also noted a crucial difference in management efficiency.
Comparing private land to, say, crown lands.
Exactly. He observed that the crown lands of Great Britain, managed by the state, produced maybe only a quarter of the rent they could if they were privately owned and managed.
Why the difference?
Private owners, he argued, have a stronger incentive for efficient management and are more willing to try experiments in agriculture or land use, which can ultimately benefit the whole country through innovation and higher productivity.
Interesting point about incentives. Okay, now let's tackle one of Smith's major targets, the mercantile system. What was the core problem he saw with it?
The fundamental flaw, as Smith saw it, was its zero-sum view of trade. The system basically taught that their interest consisted in beggaring all their neighbors.
Meaning nations thought they could only get rich by making other nations poorer.
Precisely. They looked with an invidious eye, a jealous eye, on the prosperity of their trading partners, seeing another nation's gain as their own loss.
Which is the opposite of how trade should work.
Absolutely. Smith believed commerce should be a bond of union and friendship, mutually beneficial. Instead, mercantilism turned it into a constant source of animosity and conflict.
And how did this system try to achieve its goals? Through trade barriers.
Primarily through restraints upon importation. High tariffs or even outright bans on foreign goods like French silks or woolens entering England were designed to give domestic producers a monopoly in the home market.
Protecting local jobs and industries.
That was the claim. But Smith argued these regulations don't actually increase a country's total industry or capital. They just divert capital from one use to another, potentially less productive one. He said it's by no means certain that this artificial direction is likely to be more advantageous than letting capital find its own best use.
He also mentioned specific, extraordinary restraints against countries with an unfavorable balance of trade, right? Where imports exceeded exports.
Yes, there was a huge fixation on the balance of trade, measured purely in gold and silver flows. If a country imported more from France than it exported to France, leaders worried gold was flowing out, weakening the nation.
Which led to policies like discriminating against French goods.
Exactly. He also discussed complex systems like the Bank of Amsterdam's bank money, which was partly an attempt to manage exchange rates and maintain confidence amidst these fluctuating trade balances and varying coin qualities.
And Smith directly attacked that core fear, the idea that exporting gold is always bad.
He did, very forcefully. He argued that exporting gold and silver isn't necessarily losing wealth. It's often just exchanging one form of capital for another, potentially more useful form. No goods, he said, including gold, are sent abroad but those for which they can expect a profit.
So sending gold to buy, say, materials for manufacturing could actually increase national wealth.
Absolutely. He even suggested it would be better for England to buy French wine using its own manufactured goods, like hardware, rather than using gold or even re-exported colonial goods like tobacco. Trade goods for goods, that's the real wealth creation.
Now, this gets really interesting when applied to colonies. European powers tried to monopolize colonial trade, didn't they?
They did. Smith acknowledged English colonies were generally more favored than Spanish or French ones. They had a wider market within the British Empire and often faced lower duties.
But they still faced restrictions.
Oh, definitely. Crucially, they faced prohibitions on setting up certain manufacturers that might compete with industries back in Britain. Smith didn't mince words. He called these impertinent badges of slavery.
Strong language. And what was the effect of this colonial monopoly on Britain itself? Was it actually beneficial?
Smith argued, counterintuitively perhaps, that it was ultimately harmful to Britain. This monopoly of the colony trade, he said, artificially drew capital away from other potentially profitable trades, like trade with Europe, into the colonial channel.
By making colonial trade seem extra profitable due to lack of competition.
Exactly. It raised the rate of profit in that specific sector, but by doing so, it raised the overall rate of profit in the country, which could actually slow down capital accumulation compared to lower, more competitive rates. And critically, he argued it made the wages of labor less abundant overall.
Less abundant wages. How?
Because capital was being diverted away from domestic industries or other trades where it might have employed more British labor. He pointed to Spain and Portugal, nations with the richest colonies whose own domestic industries languished under the monopoly system. It didn't bring them broad prosperity.
He even gives that extreme example about wool exports.
Right. The laws making wool exportation a felony, punishable by enormous fines, 3 shillings for every pound, which he calculated as 4 or 5 times its value.
All just to guarantee cheap wool for English manufacturers.
Precisely. protecting one interest group, the manufacturers, at the direct expense of another, the wool growers, and likely harming the overall economy by preventing wool from being sold at its best price.
So, summing up his view on the mercantile system.
He concluded it fundamentally distorted the natural, most efficient allocation of capital. It necessarily deranges this natural and most advantageous distribution of stock. His alternative was clear: a liberal system of free exportation and free importation.
Where trade flows freely based on mutual advantage.
Yes, where different nations trading freely would resemble the different provinces of a single great empire, all benefiting together. A radical idea for his time.
Absolutely. Okay, let's wrap up by looking at public finance, how governments pay for things, and the issue of debt. Smith laid out 4 famous maxims, or principles, of good taxation.
Yes, 4 guidelines that are still debated today. First, equality. People should contribute in proportion to their respective abilities, which he generally linked to their income, whether from rent, profit, or wages.
Fair share, basically. Second,
Certainty. The tax amount and payment time should be clear and predictable, not arbitrary. He contrasted unpopular arbitrary French taxes like the taille with little complained about more certain stamp duties. Convenience. Taxes should be levied when and how it's easiest for the taxpayer to pay, like taxing goods when they're bought.
and fourth, the crucial one.
Economy. The tax should take as little as possible out of the people's pockets beyond what ends up in the public treasury. Minimize collection costs, avoid discouraging industry, prevent evasion, keep it efficient.
That principle of economy seems vital. He then discussed different kinds of taxes, like taxes on wages.
He wasn't keen on direct taxes on wages. He argued they would ultimately just force wages to rise to cover the tax, meaning the burden would eventually fall on landlords through reduced rent, and employers through reduced profit, or consumers through higher prices.
What about taxes on goods, consumable commodities?
He distinguished between necessaries and luxuries. Taxes on necessaries, like salt, soap, candles then, maybe basic food or fuel now, also tend to raise labor costs, eventually hitting rent and profits. He gave the example of taxes on malt, hops, and beer, making up a big chunk of the price of a pot of porter.
So taxes on basic goods hurt the poor and affect the whole economy.
That was his view. Taxes on luxuries, however, he thought were generally fine, as they fall mainly on the rich consumers who choose to buy them.
He also singled out tithes, the church tax, as being particularly bad.
Yes, he saw tithes, often levied as a portion of the gross produce of land, as a very unequal tax. It could amount to more than a fourth part of the real rent, hitting landlords hard and discouraging agricultural improvement.
Okay, shifting to government spending and debt. How did Smith see public debt arising?
Quite simply, from a want of parsimony in the time of peace. Governments that don't live within their means during peacetime are forced to borrow heavily, contracting debt, when war inevitably breaks out.
And he noted that modern commercial states like Britain were much better at borrowing huge sums than older, less commercial nations.
Right, because commerce and manufacturing created a wealthy class of merchants and citizens who had capital available to lend to the government, secured by future tax revenues. This enabled unprecedented levels of wartime spending funded by debt.
But he was worried about this system, wasn't he? Especially regarding the sinking fund meant to pay off the debt.
Very worried. This raises a critical point. The sinking fund was supposed to gradually reduce the national debt, but Smith observed it was almost continually misapplied, rated by governments to pay for ongoing expenses, even minor ones, during peacetime.
So the debt just kept growing.
Exactly. He pointed to the massive debt accumulated from recent wars, like over 90 million from the 7 Years' War. His stark conclusion was that even in peacetime, Britain's finances were as much encumbered, its ability to save and invest as much impaired as it would have been in the time of the most expensive war had the pernicious system of funding never been adopted.
Wow. So even though the money paid in interest might stay within the country, the right hand, which pays the left, as the saying went, the overall national capacity to accumulate productive capital was damaged.
That was his core concern. The perpetual debt burden acted as a drag on the economy's potential for growth.
A sobering thought. He also touched briefly on how colonies might contribute financially.
Yes, he floated the idea of colonies contributing to imperial defense costs through taxes levied by requisition, where the central parliament sets the total amount needed, but the colonial assemblies decide how to raise it locally. A nod towards some form of fiscal federalism, perhaps.
Well, we've covered a huge amount of ground there. We've journeyed through Smith's foundational ideas, division of labor, value, wages, profits, rent,
His critique of mercantilism, his insights into capital, banking, land.
and his analysis of taxation and public debt. It's really a comprehensive system he built.
It absolutely is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Smith wasn't just theorizing in a vacuum. He was meticulously observing how economies actually worked or didn't work around him.
From the ground up.
Yes. And based on that, he developed this powerful argument for economic liberty, for letting natural forces of self-interest and competition, guided by the invisible hand, generate wealth more effectively than artificial government constraints. His detailed examples, beer taxes, crown lands, pin factories, all build towards this larger vision.
It's truly remarkable how much detail supports the grand theory. So here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. Consider how many economic debates we have right now. Arguments about free trade versus protectionism, tariffs, national debt levels, fair taxation, the role of banks.
They sound familiar.
They really do. At their heart, aren't we still grappling with the very same fundamental principles and trade-offs that Adam Smith identified well over 2 centuries ago? What does that tell you about the enduring nature of economic behavior and maybe, just maybe, the timeless value of understanding these foundational ideas?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Join us next time for another deep dive as we continue to unpack complex topics and uncover surprising facts for you.